So, before I start this kind of rambling video, I do want to note that I'm kind of nervous to post it. In fact, it's so deeply personal that I almost hope no one watches it, which is a strange feeling. But in a way, Oregairu kind of saved me from myself, so I really felt the need to share my thoughts and hopefully maybe even some advice on how it could help you. After 5 full years, yahare ore no seishu no rakubome wa machagatteiru, or Oregairu, as I'm going to be referring to it, for obvious reasons, finally returns with a third and final season of the anime. Honestly, every time I think about this show, it completely consumes my life, somehow both curing and reinforcing my crippling depression simultaneously. So when I heard that the Service Club was returning to finally complete the story from half a decade ago, well, I figured it was time to utilize my talent of extreme hyperfixation and dive deeply back into the series and just remember how, in excruciating detail, this series managed to hurt me so severely. Oregairu, or My Teen Romantic Comedy Snafu, focuses on Hikigaya Hachiman, a cynical high school student who looks upon his peers with disgust, proudly proclaiming to be a loner. Years of being dismissed, rejected, made fun of, and completely ignored by his classmates, despite his genuine desire to fit in and make friends, has left him alone. Hachiman's social isolation leads him to develop a distaste for the social dynamics his peers partake in. He views the relationships they share as fake, regularly referring to them as superficial facades. This theme is extremely prevalent in Oregairu, and part of the overarching narrative that gives this anime such a multifaceted degree of real-life authenticity, at least to me. In life, no one's ever completely truthful. Oftentimes, people disguise themselves entirely in order to make friends, fit in, or simply maintain the status quo. It's natural to not fully express yourself for the sake of forming relationships. But Hachiman firmly rejects this ideal, claiming that friendships founded on these superficial personalities couldn't be a real, genuine relationship. He takes pride in his isolation, in being hated, refusing to conform, thinking that, well, if someone can't accept him for his true self, they aren't worth the time anyway. But over the course of the series, we learn exactly how this is Hachiman's own facade, one of the most beautiful lies in fiction to me. Hikigaya Hachiman is one of the most unequivocally human characters I've ever seen portrayed in media, and I see a lot of myself in him. Years of being alone have led him to believe that his loneliness is normal and preferable, but more importantly, that he doesn't deserve a real relationship. Years of being hurt have led him to distance himself from the world to protect his fragile heart and mask the fear that so deeply categorizes him. Hachiman wants to share a genuine bond and really truly care for another person, but he can't. This is because deep down, despite the superiority complex he projects into the world, Hachiman utterly hates himself. Because he views himself as less than a human, as worthless, dispensable, as despicable, he pushes people away. Behind the facade, we find a scared teenager, terrified of opening up to anyone, because to do so would mean that he's become vulnerable to be hurt again. He so desperately fears pain, embarrassment, and rejection that he believes his only option in life is to stop caring. In my own life, I've constantly found myself stuck in a cycle of embedding myself in new hobbies and friend groups, getting along with, well, everybody, but never truly feeling like I fit in. I've learned how to interact in ways that most people tend to like, but few ever really love. I became the funny friend that everybody enjoyed having around, but never truly knew. I could make connections with people without ever revealing anything about myself, and in turn, lots of people knew who I was, but no one knew the real me. Dealing with situations this way is addicting because when your relationships with others are predicated on superficiality, it becomes easy to become detached and not care what they think of you. Eventually, I became so focused on hiding the real me to fit in that I lost sight of it completely, if it ever existed. Even now, I struggle with my own self-worth and find it really difficult to connect with and care wholeheartedly for other people. That made superficiality so appealing to me, because I didn't have to try to open up to make friends. I had many acquaintances, but continued to grow detached from other people and my own emotions. Once you begin this cycle of apathy, it's a difficult one to break. Hachiman fears vulnerability, and thus tries not to care what others think about him as a result. But when you approach social interactions this way, you begin to devalue yourself. Hachiman masks it with his own contempt for social hierarchies, but he pushes people away, effectively rejecting himself before anyone else has a chance to, because he's always alone anyway. Hachiman's so compelling because you understand his behavior is the result of his past heartbreak, and you even recognize that in some capacity at least, his raw take on social hierarchies might not be far from the truth. But Oregairu rejects any semblance of singular, simplistic character motivation. At his core, Hachiman hates himself so intensely that he regularly sacrifices his own happiness for the sake of others. He portrays himself as the villain to protect his peers despite his disgust regarding their friendships. After all, he's the most hated guy in school, and someone who's always been alone. So who better than him to unite his classmates against a common enemy? No one, not even Hachiman himself, cares for his well-being. When I think about it, it really does weigh on me heavily. They often say superheroes are the most vulnerable, pained individuals, and who truer to reflect the theme of superficial facades than someone who disguises his fear, loneliness, and self-hate with a mask of overconfidence. No, Hachiman doesn't despise friendships. He desperately craves them, but he can't open up because he doesn't want anyone to see him the way he sees himself. When I heard Oregairu was coming back for another season, I rewatched it and I cried. And I mean deeply wept, for the first time in about 4 years. It was wonderful and cathartic and made me realize how empty I felt as I muddled through adulthood. I've been so fixated on the facade of a successful and functional adult that I haven't really enjoyed anything in years. I recognize that I've become a detached, cold, empty husk of a person as a coping mechanism to deal with the pressures of... But, as overdramatic as it sounds, rewatching Oregairu this time around really made me take a good, hard look at myself in the mirror and think about the things that I, at least at one point, loved about myself. You see, Oregairu is as much about Hachiman's self-hate as it is his pilgrimage to accepting himself and, ultimately, self-love. Over the course of the series, 2 girls begin to penetrate Hachiman's shell, and before he even realizes it, they grow to care for him as a person. Hachiman, Yukino, and Yui collectively form the service club, and the trio aims to fulfill the requests of others. I said earlier that Oregairu rejects simplistic notions of characterization, and especially here is where it shines through. Put shortly, Hachiman's actions can't be defined by any singular emotional motivator, but rather a complex symphony of feelings and experiences that can't be easily explained. Hachiman fears connection, and those who partake, yet still craves it, and desires to understand what a real relationship is like. Even more so, he wants to help people, and the service club gives him a convenient way to fulfill that desire, while still remaining a detached and unaffected third party. His attitude predictably leads him to constantly self-sacrifice, abandoning possible chances at his own happiness so that others might be saved instead. These sacrifices let him benefit his peers while simultaneously pushing them away. After all, he can repeatedly and willingly destroy himself because it's natural for him to be the most hated one, because he doesn't value himself anyway, because he's always alone. Except that now, he's not. Through the service club in Yukino and Yui, he gains two people who could potentially give him what he was seeking the whole time, a genuine relationship. His self-destructive tactics used to work when he was alone, but those who grew to care for him as a person become saddened and pained by his overt lack of any self-respect that he misconstrues as a twisted sense of pride. No, when Hachiman is finally faced with people who could give him a real connection, he becomes lost. At the core of his mental image of himself, he was alone because he chose to be, because society's corrupt and people only care about useless, fake relationships. But in reality, his detachment from others led him to completely disconnect from his own feelings. Before he knew it, those two girls had given him a place where he could finally find peace, and he had grown to care for them more deeply than he has for anyone in his entire life, save for maybe his younger sister. The only way Hachiman could solve problems was by devaluing himself. But now that he isn't alone anymore, the situation changes. Without realizing it, he grew to care for both Yukino and Yui. And upon realizing how much they mean to him, Hachiman understands that he both does not want to lose them, nor does he want to hurt them. But because he's scared to take the next step and become vulnerable, he can't truly progress their relationship. In the end, however, Hachiman is forced to confront the fact that until he learns to, on some level, accept himself, he can never truly open up to others and find that genuine, real connection he's seeking. Hachiman's character arc isn't characterized by grand revelations, but rather the simple realization that everything he was seeking had been right before his eyes the entire time. In the culmination of one of the most redemptive, rewarding, relatable, cathartic character arcs in history, Hachiman finally learns the truth. Getting hurt, hurting others, taking risks, protecting those you care for are all part of being human. The fear of losing someone can cause you to act a certain way, but taking that action might hurt them in a different way, so you do nothing. But even doing nothing can still inadvertently hurt someone. The point is, in the end, you can't truly care for someone without both becoming vulnerable and accepting that to care for another human is to accept yourself and come to terms with the fact that you might get hurt or hurt the person you're trying to protect. Though my facade is nothing like Hachiman's, the point of Oregairu is that not everything is as it seems. The most popular, successful person could be suffering the most. Similarly, someone who most regularly dismisses human connection could be the one craving it most heavily. I relate to Hachiman because his story is centered on self-acceptance. My whole life, personality, maybe even my hobbies have been driven by that same deeply repressed fear of being known, hurt, rejected, shamed, and hated. But after rewatching Oregairu, I took a good hard look at that aspect of myself. Just like Hachiman, though I was constantly rejected, more often than not, the rejecter was me. And I admire this theme of duality, that caring for others means you don't want to hurt or lose them, but simultaneously means that you're more likely to hurt or be hurt. Moreover, becoming vulnerable isn't a source of weakness or shame, but rather it's a source of pride. Caring for someone is knowing that some things are simply worth fighting for. To care for someone enough to risk being hurt or hurting them is really a beautiful thing. Understanding each other, not understanding each other, being selfless, being selfish, they exist as two sides of the same coin. To be human, in essence, is to drop your walls and let others in. Firstly, I apologize for the length and sometimes aimlessness of this video. There was a lot of core themes that really heavily resonate with me that I just wanted to unpack. Oregairu made me reevaluate my approach to life. I think that adults can easily forget the fact that though it's natural to harden your skin and sharpen your spirit in order to survive in this cruel world, it doesn't always need to be. At heart, everyone's wishing for the same thing. For someone to share something genuine with. The happiness, sadness, the pain, the guilt, the fear, the hope, and find peace in that shared experience. In fact, over the past few months as I've built up the hype to rewatch and see the new season of Oregairu, I've tried to take active steps to build or rebuild the relationships I have with others. Likewise, for the first time in maybe 10 years, I made an honest attempt to outwardly reject my depressive impulses. Hachiman is me. To protect the people I care about, I need to learn to love myself. To love myself, I have to become in tune with my feelings and those of others. Because to share something genuine is to share all of that, to burden each other with pain, so that you might share in the happiness together. Being human is taking that risk and becoming vulnerable.